Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg appeared before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee today to answer questions about U.S. DOT policies. But as far as trucking matters goes, there wasn't much. Members of the committee spent very little time discussing the issues that matter to you, and by extension, neither did the Secretary. A situation has come up that has serious potential consequences, drivers being stranded by their carriers. I'll discuss that, plus scam text messages and how to pull an MVR with Joe Biggs and Aron Lynch of OOIDA's Business Services Department. You may have caught the recent news about the Brooklyn Queens Expressway in New York City. They're using weigh-in-motion scales on heavy trucks, and soon violations will come with hefty fines. Zach Miller, the director of Metro Region Operations for the Trucking Association of New York, lays out what we know and what could be next. And finally, there's a bounce back in the number of loads on the DAT load board. Robert Rouse says it saw a 7% increase in load volume last week. We'll have more details on today's Market Update. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to spend some time inside the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee hearing room, where Wednesday morning and into the afternoon, the Secretary of Transportation appeared to answer questions.
We'll go ahead and call the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure to order.
Committee Chair Sam Graves got things started off there. Members of the committee followed. The first trucking-centric question coming from Congressman Mike Bost of Illinois, sponsor of the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act in the House, which would allocate $755 million over 4 years for truck parking. Representative Bost began by talking about Secretary Buttigieg's recent trip to South Dakota to celebrate the expansion of truck parking outside of Sioux Falls. We'll let that exchange play out.
I saw that you took a trip to highlight the infrastructure projects related to truck parking. One project you visited was 10 additional spots, which is helpful, although the money came from our infrastructure funds. In addition, your department announced 86 new grants last week, and those 86 grants, only 4 even mention truck parking, and they have to do with IT systems at the truck stops. Now, my question is based on the information that I've just given. You've created 0 additional truck parking locations, even with the record amount of money that was given to you in the infrastructure bill that we passed. You haven't done anything substantial to expand new truck parking locations, so the problem still exists. What do you plan to do about fixing the problem instead of ever just continuing to talk about it?
Well, again, we are funding projects that are both increasing the physical availability of parking, truck parking by adding truck parking spaces, and helping to optimize the parking that's there. So when you hear about an IT-oriented project, what we're trying to do is correct the fact that in addition to there just plain not being enough spaces out there, which is certainly a problem that won't be solved by 10 spots here or 12 spots there, that we're also giving truck drivers better access to insights about where the spaces are going to be. Because what we hear a lot when I'm talking to drivers is they'll be over the road, they'll have a look at their electronic logging device, they know they're coming into that last hour. And now they're faced with the choice of either giving up income and not going as far as they feel they ought to, or even as far as their employer expects them to, because they know there might be a space, or pressing forward, taking a bit of a gamble on whether there's going to be a space nearer to where they'll be when they time out. And so if they have more reliable information, and a number of states, Florida's DOT is one that's working on this, and I think Tennessee's done some work on this too. If they can provide better information, could be a relatively low-tech solution like a webcam, could be something a little more sophisticated, giving them a live tracking update, they can get better certainty there. It's about recognizing that we're not going to address the physical side overnight, even though we're working hard to do that. Trying to balance that with optimizing what's there and adding to what's there.
I understand that. I've been in the trucking business all my life, and I can tell you that the problem really is not enough spaces available.
The trip Representative Bost referenced at the top of his remarks was to Salem, South Dakota, where truck parking was expanded at 2 rest areas by about a dozen spots. Then, about 2 hours later, another mention of a trucking issue, this one from Representative Rudy Yakum of Indiana, who expressed concerns about drayage trucks in California.
In that case, I want to flag something for you that seems like a major supply chain disruption that's brewing. Beginning January 1st of 2024, in just over 3 months, California will require drayage fleets to purchase only zero-emissions trucks. Let me ask, do you know how many zero-emissions Class 7 and 8 tractor trucks and terminal tractors were on the road statewide in California at the end of 2022?
I know that this is a very new technology, so you're not going to see a lot of them deployed just yet.
Yeah, so there's only 100, you're right, it's not a lot. It's 192 that were registered in the entire state, and they're all electric. But the ports of LA and Long Beach, 2 of America's busiest ports, require thousands of drayage trucks to move products through our supply chain. And an official in the port actually estimates that roughly 1,500 to 2,000 drayage trucks serving LA, Long Beach are retired every year. Given that there are only 192 Class 7 and 8 electric trucks across the entire state of California, do you think that all 1,500 to 2,000 drayage trucks will be able to be replaced with electric vehicles next year per this new mandate?
So as a department, we've not created a formal assessment of whether the industry will be able to meet the compliance timeline set forth by CARB. But we certainly recognize that that represents an aggressive transition. We've been in dialogue with the port directors about the efforts to comply there. I do think there's great opportunity for the EV use case in the drayage context because you often have predictable, defined, and relatively short runs. But that doesn't mean all of that technology is immediately available, and certainly something that we're monitoring, though we don't have direct authority to tell the state what to do in that regard.
So while the federal government may not have direct authority to tell the state what to do, this California mandate to move to zero-emissions vehicles with drayage trucks is a mandate.
And then one more trucking-related issue, the Highway Trust Fund and the effect the electrification of vehicles will play in reducing the amount of money going into it.
Can you comment on how we can maintain our infrastructure with the increased weight and decreased funding for our infrastructure?
Sure. And again, ever since CAFE standards began in the Nixon administration, improving the average efficiency of a car past 13.5 miles per gallon, there has been the effect, alongside all of the money that it saves drivers and car owners, that it also means that because Americans are paying less for gas, they're paying less gas tax. We think Americans paying less for gas is a good thing. We think Americans paying less gas tax because they're getting more efficient vehicles is a good thing. But we recognize that that means there have to be alternative ways to support the Highway Trust Fund. Historically, Congress has filled that gap through general dollars. That's not the only way to do it, but it's certainly a legitimate way to do it, and it's what has been happening ever since that gap first opened up.
As far as trucking-centric conversations go, that was it. Wednesday's hearing was noteworthy in the topics that were not discussed. There was no mention of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's proposed mandate of speed limiters on heavy trucks, no mention of broker transparency, an issue FMCSA and the USDOT have promised an update on. There was also no mention of the automatic emergency braking proposal put forward by NHTSA and FMCSA either, and no deep discussion really of the supply chain or the numerous challenges currently facing it. The Biden administration's electric vehicle policies were the main focus throughout, with quite a few questions from lawmakers about railroad development and safety as well, and concerns about aviation issues that have popped up in recent months. Now, this was as of recording time, we should mention. If any of these issues were finally discussed in the marathon hearing, we'll have those for you soon. For Landline Now News, I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll cover drivers being stranded by their carriers with Joe Biggs and Aron Lynch of OOIDA's Business Services Department, and we'll have information on the new weigh-in motion scales on the BQE in New York City. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
Landline Now, welcome back. Every day, truckers call OOIDA with problems they're encountering out on the road, looking for advice on how to handle those situations. And many of those truckers end up talking with OOIDA's Business Services Department. Here to discuss some recent problems and what the possible solutions are Aron Lynch and Joe Biggs of Business Services. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thank you as always, Mark.
Thanks for having us on, Mark.
The first situation we've got here is drivers, when they're being terminated from their driving positions, are being stranded where they are. What have we heard from drivers? Can you tell us about any specific cases or stories of this happening?
Yeah, so most commonly it involves when you're in a lease purchase and you're either living in that truck itself or, you're paying on that truck and you don't make all the payments because they're starving you out and you can't get by as far as that goes. I had one guy call up here the other day. He was in the shower and he had gotten the truck taken from the lot while he was in the shower. Luckily, he had to change of clothes, but not much else. His cell phone, all of his personal belongings, wallet, and stuff like that were in the truck itself. So he had to go to the Flying J and actually make a phone call from there to try to see what was going on. He didn't even know that it was being taken. But that's just one of the things that happen, as far as that goes when you get involved in that. And it's not just prohibited to lease purchases. It's just in general, when you're being terminated from a contract, they don't have to have you, they don't have to bring you back to the terminal. They don't have to find you a way home. A lot of them will send you an airplane ticket or whatnot to go there, but not when you're coming back.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not just necessarily being stranded. I mean, they do a number of distasteful things. I had a guy call and I was talking to him. They got him a bus ticket back, but the bus wouldn't allow him to bring on his personal effects. He had his fridge and stuff like that, and then some sentimental value stuff. He went home. He started getting in contact with them. Hey, when can I get my stuff? Can you send it to me? Like, what's the situation there? Oh, we don't have that stuff. We don't know where that went. We didn't think it was ever even here. I mean, and you're talking a good number of stuff, items that he had that now are gone. So, I mean, they can leave you stranded to where you got to figure out how to get home. And maybe you don't have money because, like he said, they starved you out. Or they send you on your way, say, yeah, we'll give you your stuff later, and then you never get it back.
So what advice can we offer people if you're in this situation? What can people do once they find themselves stranded somewhere?
So usually in most cases, when the writing's on the wall when it's going to happen. It's not usually a surprise. Maybe at that time in that time frame, but you can see it coming weeks in advance or at least days in advance. So to be able to prepare for it, you want to have some money set to the side so that you have the ability to be able to find your own way back on your own accord. As far as personal belongings, you want to keep that to a minimum. Now, it's different if you live in the truck itself, but you're not going to be able to take, like Joe was saying, a microwave or a little mini fridge or something like that on a bus. It's even worse if you have, a pet, like a dog. You want to make arrangements so you always have something. If you plan on quitting yourself, you always want to make sure that you have the fuel to get where you need to go to be able to turn that back into the terminal, because a lot of times carriers will turn that fuel card off. That way you are stuck on the side of the road. And then all of a sudden you're looking at a truck abandonment because you have nowhere to go. So that's also a tactic that's been utilized that's not talked about enough, in my opinion. Making sure you have the resources or family or friends to be able to get your way back home is pretty necessary.
One of the things that I noticed in there you talked about is lease purchase, and I know that lease purchases are something that we strongly advise against in most cases. Is there anything you can do in terms of the lease purchase to avoid having this happen, or is that just something that's you're not able to alleviate?
Honestly, no. There's not a whole lot you can do because, like he said, most of the times you'll understand that that's what's going to happen.
But there are instances where you're just running along. They say, yeah, just come back to the shop. We got to do some stuff. And then you're on your own. And I mean, there's not going to be anything in that lease agreement that gives you any alleviation from the issue. I mean, they're not going to say, okay, well, if we terminate you, we'll get you back home, yada, yada. That's not going to be in there. So at that point, I mean, there's not really much you can do.
Just avoid the lease purchase in the first place.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Let's go on to another topic here, and that is scam text messages. What sort of text scams are going on right now? Can you give us some examples?
One big one that I've been getting a lot of phone calls about are that reasonable suspicion training. And that's basically for a carrier that has multiple employees to be able to watch a video or whatnot. It's not necessarily, we call them scam text messages. It's not necessarily a scam. It's real. It's a real thing, but it doesn't apply to everyone. And sometimes these places are sending you links or sending you a website or whatnot to be able to go purchase it through them. And a lot of times it's either free or it may be $10 and they're charging $200. That's kind of where the scam or the solicitation comes in.
A reasonable suspicion, that deals with drug testing, right?
Correct. And just like CMCI, as part of OOIDA, we do that here, So you don't necessarily need to go outside of the metrics to get that.
Okay. Are there other scams going on right now by text message that you guys are aware of?
Typically, it's just about things like you said that are coming up. The MCS 150 update, that's a big one. They don't really look to see if you've done it. They just know that your DOT number, based off the numbers that it's up and coming. Towards the end of the year, you'll see UCR, stuff like that. Like you said, it's legitimate stuff, but they're either trying to charge you way too much or maybe it's not even the correct time for you to do it. But as far as any other type of scams, no, it's typically stuff like that.
How are they getting the phone numbers? Do we know?
It's public information. It's on Safer.
Okay. So there's nothing you can do in terms of that to get your phone number to where they can't get at it.
Well, and that's how they get your mailing address, too, because whatever address is on there, it's either you're going to be your house or your business address. It's on there as well, so you get it by mail. The only way they don't necessarily get it, they can even get your email to a certain degree if they have some of the methodology correct and down. That's a little bit harder, but, yeah, they can get your information. It's all public online.
And the FMCSA, it's worth putting out there, will not text you for this stuff. Typically, it'll be mail. They will email on occasion, depending on what it is, but they will not text you asking you to update this stuff.
Yeah, FMCSA or DOT don't text.
How do you spot these scams that are kind of not scams so that you don't get taken in?
Typically, like a text, like we said, they're not going to text you. If you do get like a letter or an email, somewhere on there, it probably will say in the small print that we are not actually affiliated with the Department of Transportation, something of that sort. And if you have any, concerns or hesitations, just give us a shout in the Compliance Center. We'll discuss it with you and let you know if it's legitimate or not.
Yeah, or we'll put our heads together, and if we don't know the answer right away when you call, we'll hang up and we'll call you back the same day, and we'll put all of our heads together and figure out one way or another if it's truly legitimate or not, even if we have to make the phone call or try to reach out on your behalf.
And folks, if you do need to do that, the phone number is 816-229-5791. Again, 816-229-5791. Guys, let's go on to one other topic here, and that is pulling your MVR or motor vehicle record. Who do you contact? What is your first step here?
So to pull your MVR, you can do it a few different ways, right? So you can go down to the DMV and pull your motor vehicle record. It's a small fee, it's a one-time fee, and it's basically just an abstract record of your driving record. You can also, in some states, not all, but some states, do it online. You can literally type in Google, get MVR Florida, get MVR Arkansas, things of that nature, and they will pull up, and you can do it online. There's still a fee associated with that, too. We also do it in the Compliance Connections program that we offer here. You can call us up, and we can get you over there. They pull it for a fee as well. That's just a few things that you can do to try to do that. And you got to do it on a yearly basis. Keep in mind, this is a requirement to keep in your actual driver file for every driver. You have to pull one on each driver once a year.
Even if you're the driver and the owner?
Correct.
That's one of the key things there is a lot of these things when you're your own carrier, you've got to pull it on yourself as if you're an employee.
Correct. You have to treat yourself like you're hiring yourself. And a lot of people don't understand that or it doesn't make sense. But that is the way to go.
Who else may be looking at your MVR? I mean, who else is trying to get access to that or can get access to that, and how can it affect you?
Typically, the only people who can get it without your consent would be insurance companies. They'd be the ones looking at it to determine your liability. Brokers and people of that nature, they're not going to be able to get that unless you voluntarily hand it over. That's not typically public access. You have to be a certain group or yourself as the individual who can pull that information.
What sort of information is in there? I mean, you mentioned a little bit there, Aron, but I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit more detail on what kind of information is in your MVR.
So an MVR is available in each state, right? And it's going to be a record of your violations or past history. And it's going to be a record of any crash that you've had in the last few years as well. Depends on how far you pull it back, if you do a 3-year, 5-year, or a 10-year. So it's basically crashes and violations.
Okay. Let's go on to one last topic here, and that is brokers who are charging exorbitant amounts in late fees for loads. What are we hearing from drivers? I mean, what are they saying about this?
That they're trying to nickel and dime them. They feel like anytime they make the wrong move, there's a huge fee associated with it. I spoke to a guy probably a month or two ago. He got to the receiver. He was 15 minutes early and was told to go back around to the end of the line. Well, at that point he was late and he got hit with like a $250 late fee. It's just things to charge the carrier or the driver even more. And they try to use it as to keep you on time and all that and keep everything flowing. But sometimes it seems a little predatory.
Is this the shippers or the brokers that are doing this?
This is strictly the brokers. In most of the cases that I've looked into in depth, they'll blame it on the shippers. But then when you ask for proof that there was some kind of fee associated with that, they're unable to provide it, or they're just flat out refuse. Some of them that I've called personally. So I can't for certain say it's just the brokers, but I'm pretty confident in saying that it has nothing to do with the shippers. That, like Joe said, they're even in more instances, it's more than just nickel and diming. In the contract, it'll say we'll charge you $150 for being late, right? But then there's a $600 fee when you get charged, and then when you call that broker, you try to explain the situation, and you've been in communication this whole time. Well, why is it $600? Well, the shipper told us. Well, where's the proof of that? Well, we don't have to show you.
Right. And the agreement, you'll typically sign your rights away to see any documentation validating whatever claims they want to make.
And there's the thing is, you've got to read the contract. This is something that's typically in the contract.
Typically, yes. Now, there are times where it's not in there, but more than likely it's going to be in there saying there's going to be fees for this, that, and the other. And you definitely want to read that contract. You need to know what you're agreeing to and what you're agreeing to give away, essentially, as far as, what protects you as the carrier.
In terms of avoiding situations like this or avoiding these kind of late fees, is there anything besides just making sure that it's not in the contract? Is there anything you can do to help alleviate the situation?
Check credit scores. Work with brokers that you know that you've done business with before.
Okay. Well, guys, we ran out of time, but I want to thank you very much for the information on all this stuff.
I appreciate you having us on, Mark.
As always, thanks.
I've been talking with Joe Biggs and Aron Lynch of OOIDA's Business Services Department. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Forget misaccuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
When you weigh on a cat scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. We reported recently about a situation on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway involving weigh-in-motion scales that could result in significant fines being levied on trucks. Zach Miller is the director of Metro Region Operations for the Trucking Association of New York. He's been following the issue for his organization. I talked with him recently to discuss what's happening in New York City. For those who didn't hear our earlier coverage or aren't familiar, I'm wondering if you could, first of all, just kind of broadly review the situation that's been proposed for the Brooklyn Queens Expressway.
So right now, we're still kind of in a wait-and-see mode. We know that city DOT wants a really robust influx of, they're applying for a grant from the feds to really redesign the BQE. There are a lot of stakeholders at place in this. The good news is for our industry that it is a major freight corridor, as we all know. It is the only interstate that goes through the city, as we know. That goes through that part, Brooklyn and Bronx. And there are 13,000 trucks a day that go through it that they know must maintain access there. Whatever the plan looks like moving forward, trucks will have access on the BQE. However, and I think this gets into some of the news recently with weigh-in-motion, there is an issue with overweight trucks on the BQE and what that might look like moving forward. In 2020, because the roadway deteriorated so much, it is a 70-year-old piece of infrastructure, overweight trucks were banned on the BQE. So overweight trucks have been rerouted around the BQE, and the belief is that with this weigh-in-motion technology, they will be able to keep overweight trucks off the BQE. We shall see. This is a first-in-the-nation type of program. It does exist in other countries, but I always hesitate comparing what other countries do to us here because we are so different. And there are a lot of factors to consider that make the BQE and New York City highway system itself a little unique and extra challenging.
Okay. Now, do we have a timeline in terms of the weigh-in-motion and the installation of those devices on the BQE? Do we have a timeline of when that might come about?
We do. So on August 10th, they officially started with a warning system. So it's going to be a 90-day warning. So any overweight truck, the owner of that truck will be given a warning letter saying that, hey, we found you to be overweight by, X number. And starting November 8th, there will be enforcement. And that enforcement is going to be a $650 ticket. So that is on the Queens-bound side. The Staten Island-bound side is going to be a little bit delayed. So once Staten Island is ready, it's going to be the same situation. There'll be a 90-day warning period, and then enforcement will begin. We don't have the Staten Island dates yet. That's not quite ready. But warning began on August 10th for Queensbound, and enforcement will start on November 8th.
Now, I'm curious, there is that section of the BQE they call the triple cantilever. That's kind of that three-layer type of arrangement of bridges. Are the weigh-in-motion scales just going to be on that, or are they going to be on the entire highway?
So that's such a great question. That's the section they're really focused on right now. We do have concerns about potential expansion here. Automated enforcement does tend to expand. It rarely sort of stays in the area that it initiates from. But right now, that's really all that's been discussed. And a lot of that is because that is a very unique structure. It does need major work. They have begun doing that work, but because of the way it's built and designed, doing that work is complicated and there's a greater impact to that section. So that's why they really wanted to have the weigh-in-motion on, to protect that infrastructure.
Okay. We've heard some concerns about weigh-in-motion scales and particularly their accuracy. What's your view of those devices?
I would share in that concern. We really don't know how accurate they are. I think, or I should say, I really hope that this warning period, we get a good sense of how accurate they are. I will say that DOT is cognizant of these concerns. The ticket will not be issued to the weight. The ticket, there is a little bit of wiggle room here where if you're 10% over gross vehicle weight or 20% over by axle, that's what kicks in the enforcement. So anything from the weight up until 10% for gross or 20% by axle, you will not be given a summons to address that concern. And DOT will be sort of running diagnostics. They'll be running diagnostics consistently, but they will be reevaluated every 6 months. So every 6 months they will go through and sort of reset the scales to make sure that they're working properly, which we were told is a far shorter time frame than other places do. Other places only really check it once a year.
Talk a little bit about the fine amounts and how many trucks are potentially going to be hit with overweight fines.
So the amount is $650, and this happens with overweight tickets where they'll be issued overweight for gross and then also overweight by the axle. A lot of times, I will say, in typical NYPD enforcement, they can stack them where they'll say they'll issue a ticket for overweight and each axle. As we understand it, it will be one overweight for gross and just one for axle. So you are looking at potentially $650 times 2, which may be less than tickets issued by NYPD in some cases. The numbers we're talking about, what we were told is about 15% of the trucks that are monitored on the Queens-bound side are overweight, and it's about 12% in Staten Island. So it's not a majority of the trucks. It's pretty small percentage, but of course, you're still talking about a decent chunk of vehicles there, and of course, it's not like New York City is cheap to operate in to begin with. So there are those concerns there. We also are a little concerned about the data being skewed. Again, the BQE is not the great example of it because all overweights are banned, whether they have a permit, a divisible load permit or not. However, to your question of what about expanding this, we don't quite know how many of the vehicles are overweight at a level that we would say would be, gross overweight or even potentially negligently overweight, or how many vehicles are actually overweight because they were issued a divisible load permit to operate downstate, but that doesn't apply to New York City. New York City froze their divisible load permit in the 80s, so there's a have and have not system in terms of who can legally run overweight in New York City, but that permit is still issued for the surrounding counties in the New York metropolitan area. So we'd really like to get to the bottom of how many of that, 15% or 12% are significantly overweight and how many are overweight up until that divisible load permit issuance. And I think that's really important information for operators to have that we'd really love to get.
Do we know, honestly, and I mean, I know that they have their figures in terms of the percentages they say are overweight on these highways, but do we know if this is really a substantial problem or to what extent is this just a revenue raiser for the city of New York?
It's probably a little bit of both. Let's put it this way. There have been trucks clocked at pretty significant weights, anywhere from 110,000 pounds all the way up to, we heard, 174,000 pounds. So that's a problem. Of course, is it a problem that the entire industry should be painted with the same brush? I would argue that that's not the case. I think the real answer to that question is right now it's more about revenue because as we all know, enforcement is just one tool in the toolbox in terms of managing overweight vehicles. So we mentioned the divisible load permit system. If they unfroze the divisible load permit system and really matched the weights in New York City to the rest of the state, especially the surrounding metro counties, and if they actually did something where they would create overnight truck parking, they would have public weigh stations where drivers can actually weigh themselves when they're leaving a job site, that they didn't even load the vehicle. I think that's the holistic way to manage these overweight trucks. Enforcement is a tool, but it's not the only one. So if the city's viewpoint is, well, we have this automated enforcement and that's enough and that's great, I think that speaks to it's about revenue and it's about sort of painting the industry in a broad brush. If it's about, we have this new enforcement tool, we think it could help, let's tie it to some weigh stations, let's tie it to a fair permit system, then I think we're talking about a real management plan.
We've kind of talked about this a little bit here, but what do you think the potential is for this to be expanded beyond the Brooklyn Queens Expressway?
Oh, I would imagine that's going to be the case. I mean, I think that it's unlikely for it to just be BQE and that's it. And the BQE is unique because of the construction that's going to happen, because it is going to be revamped over the next decade or so here. But we would expect to see this expanded. And, the city has weight limits that are a little different than the rest of the state. The city has length limits that are different than the rest of the state. And there is concern that this would expand and this would cover more roadways and more different vehicle types. And there's also the, for lack of a better phrase, the elephant in the room, which is the electric vehicles, which are heavier. So there's also concern that New York City really wants to see more electric trucks on the road. We know they're not there yet, but eventually they will be coming. The batteries weigh more, and so then companies have to start looking at it of, do we run more trucks? Are the trucks we're running heavier? How is the city really going to manage these heavier weights, these heavier loads on the vehicles that they claim that they want to see? And where do the cameras fit in with that? And so, we do think that this could be expanded here to other highways in the New York City highway system.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to add or you think maybe I missed there?
Anybody listening who does run New York City, do check out the Office of Freight Mobility's website on New York City DOT's website. It's, the Freight Mobility page. There's some good information there, but there's also some context there. So if you're seeing something, if you're getting notifications that you think are inaccurate, if you're seeing things you want to bring to their attention, that's the forum to do it. And I can tell you that they do listen and they do collect this data and this feedback, and they do make tweaks accordingly.
Okay. Well, Zach, thank you for your time. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, too.
That was Zach Miller, the Director of Metro Region Operations for the Trucking Association of New York, talking about the installation of weigh-in-motion scales on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway in New York City. Landline Now will be back in a moment.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be, and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello once again to Robert Rouse with DAT. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Ashley. Thanks for asking.
Now, fall is officially here this week. What did we see happen in the spot market last week?
Yeah, last week was kind of an interesting one. After kind of a down week over Labor Day, last week we saw load posts actually increase 7% in total volume and brought it up to just over 1.365 million loads. Even though we saw this bounce back in loads, we're still seeing pretty decent lower volumes than even what we saw in 2019. So definitely something we're looking at ahead of the fall shipping season. When we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they increased as well and increased by about 14.5% up to 368,000 trucks. So last week, I got to spend some time with some drivers at a trucker appreciation events in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. And while load volumes is an important topic, most drivers' top concern was really around fuel prices. In California, drivers were reporting some stations being over $7 a gallon. And the national diesel price average came up to over $4.63 per gallon. Unfortunately, it's most likely going to continue to rise throughout the rest of winter. The Energy Information Association just released their short-term energy outlook report. This is a report that kind of says what they think is going to go on in the industry. And they actually increased their forecast for diesel prices up 3.5% from their previous forecast. So a couple of refineries will have upcoming maintenance completed, which will reduce oil supplies on the East Coast. Plus the Northeast will start using more oil supplies for heating as we move into the winter and colder months. And all of that's going to have a pretty significant impact on diesel prices, especially in the Northeast over the next couple of months. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw the load to truck ratios decrease for vans and reefers. But while overall load post increased, we saw more trucks available in the market than in the previous week, as we saw potentially some of those drivers took that Labor Day weekend off. When we look at flatbeds, even though load post volumes continue to track around half of what they were in 2019 and around this time last year, load posts have actually increased 25% in the last month, following last week's 19% week-over-week increase. And a carrier equipment post were up by just over 16% week-over-week, so it wasn't exactly the same. And that caused the flatbed load-to-truck ratio to actually increase, which was great. It was the only one to do that, from 6.85 to 6.99. When we look at the overall rates, though, national benchmark broker-to-carrier spot rates for reefers and flatbeds dropped just a penny per mile last week, while vans dropped by about 2 cents per mile. When we look at the rate averages over the past 6 weeks, they've been pretty consistent. And this is one of the signs that the market seems to be bottoming out, and we're not seeing a lot of movement. So hopefully seeing over the next couple of weeks, those rates potentially start to pick back up as that fall shipping season really kicks into high gear.
What types of produce will see a significant increase in shipments in the upcoming months as we transition into the fall season?
Yeah, produce is going to be a big thing over the next couple of weeks. But a couple of weeks ago, we talked about pumpkins, which is a pretty key fall staple. However, the other major fall produce that is consumed more is apples. The United States is one of the world's largest producers of apples, with apple orchards found in many states across the country. However, some regions are particularly well known for their apple production due to favorable climate conditions. So some of the top apple producing states include Washington, New York, Michigan, and even Oregon has some pretty decent apple orchards as well. Even though apple production numbers in the Pacific Northwest are down slightly compared to last year, growers expect the final volumes to be up around 20% year over year by the end of the season. And that was according to Ignacio Veladez, who is a sales manager for Salix. After 2 years of shrinking export volumes, he said some factors should help reverse this trend, including a bigger crop, freight rates adjusting down after spiking during the pandemic, and probably more size 100 and smaller apples being available will help some of the overseas export markets, and that will boost volumes for Middle East markets, especially India, once the import duty reduction starts. And they'll also expect growing volumes for the Latin American markets as well. But in contrast, the New York apple crop could be down by about 20% year over year. And that's due to some spring frost that occurred at bloom time in late May. Vineyards and apple orchards across the Northeast are still gauging damage from the late season frost that wiped out about a third of the most of the crop for some of the growers, who say it was the worst frost damage they've seen in quite a while. But according to the USDA, Pacific Northwest produce region contributed to 22% of last week's truckload volumes compared to California's 18% of the total loads. We normally see California it takes the most of all the loads, but we're seeing that to start to shift up to the Pacific Northwest. When we look at Washington State itself, produce volumes were down about 4% lower than they were in 2022, but the outbound produce loads were averaging about $2.57 per mile, which was decent to see.
In light of the recent hurricanes along the East Coast over the past few weeks, could you provide some advice for carriers regarding managing freight loads during such weather events?
Yeah, of course. It's that time of year. Hurricane season in the United States typically runs from June 1st to November 30th each year. Each hurricane will have its own unique impact on the spot market based on the severity and the path of the storm. So as a point of reference, during the 4-week period in 2017 that included Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, load posts for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds all increased 28%, 17%, and 67% respectively, as FEMA and other relief agencies saw immediate capacity on the spot market, pushing rates higher as a result. By the time the storm was passed, rebuilding efforts were well underway in mid-October 2017, which pushed rates higher again. So with hurricanes, freight movements are usually affected in 3 stages. First is before the storm. If it's predicted in advance, shippers and FEMA will rush it to move freight in and out of an area where the storm is expected to make landfall, and truckload rates usually rise pretty sharply in that time period. During the storm, nothing moves in and out of an affected area. It's just not safe. FEMA and other organizations will move emergency relief supplies to locations just outside of the storm zone so that they're ready to act as soon as those roads clear. That's usually when you're going to see drivers pick up a load and then stage it up someplace close, and FEMA will pay you to kind of stay in that one spot for a couple of days potentially until they're ready to go. Lastly, after the storm is over, emergency supplies that are brought in and inbound rates shoot way up, at least for a little while. Van and reefer freight moves in first, and then followed by flatbeds hauling construction equipment and materials. And so all of that, it kind of helps you understand how to react when you see storms coming in. It's something that every driver should be watching as this type of season happens to see how it will affect the industry. So as I mentioned, each hurricane will affect the spot market differently. So it's important to use tools like DAT lane makers or load counts to see what areas are actually seeing an increase in loads going into and out of. It's obvious that the path of the hurricane would be a focus, but a lot of times that will actually pull trucks from other adjacent markets and cause those rates to jump in as well. So for example, a lot of times a Florida or South Carolina hurricane that comes in will actually have a pretty strong impact on the Northeast, which is pulling a lot of those trucks down to bring bottled water, things like that, down from the Northeast, down to those affected areas. And then you'll see Northeast rates really jump pretty high. The last thing to really understand and make sure you plan for is fuel is not always readily available. And when there are evacuation orders, gas stations often run out of every kind of fuel, even diesel, and the storm can keep stations from getting resupplied. So check on the fuel availability before starting out and have a plan, and that will keep you safe when you're delivering these types of goods.
All right, wonderful. Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley.
That was Robert Rouse with DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing.
My kids.
Chrome. And I am
a
professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.